All right, let's jump straight into this explainer and tackle what is arguably the ultimate business survival question for any short-run firm. We always talk about maximizing profits and scaling up, right? But what happens when things go completely sideways? When the market shifts, prices tank, and your ledger is just bleeding red ink, the decisions you make in that exact moment are literally the difference between weathering the storm or shutting down forever. So if your business is losing money today, should you lock the doors tomorrow? Your gut instinct is probably screaming, yes, get out now and stop the bleeding. But the economic reality is actually a whole lot more fascinating than that. It all really boils down to distinguishing between two critical survival markers. Because as it turns out, taking a loss doesn't automatically mean you should immediately halt production. There's a highly precise methodology we use to figure out exactly when a firm should keep running despite those losses, and when it is mathematically forced to call it quits. To figure out when to close, we first have to map out what our safe harbor looks like. Economists call this the break-even state, or normal profit. Think of it as the absolute no profit, no loss zone. In this scenario, your firm is bringing in exactly enough revenue to cover every single one of its costs, and yes, that includes the opportunity cost of the entrepreneur. You aren't exactly getting rich here, but you are perfectly viable, sustaining operations without sinking into the negative. This beautifully illustrates our baseline goal. A firm is breaking even when it covers all its costs, meaning total revenue perfectly matches total cost. And if we break that down to a per unit basis, it means your average revenue exactly equals your average cost. This is our economic baseline, you know? It's that benchmark of stability that every producer wants to fiercely defend during tough times. Now let's visualize how these conditions actually play out. Imagine a tracking dot moving along an upper price line, which we'll call P1. If we follow this price line straight across, we hit a sweet spot at point E1. And notice what's happening right there at E1. The price, or average revenue, perfectly intersects the short-run average cost, or SAC, curve. On top of that, the short-run marginal cost curve is cutting right up through that exact same point. So point E1 is our true break-even point. The firm is earning exactly normal profit right there. But here's the dilemma. What if the market suddenly crashes and you fall right out of that safe harbor? Imagine the market price drops way below P1. Suddenly, your average revenue is less than your short-run average cost, meaning you are literally losing money on every single unit you make. The immediate reflex from most people would be total panic, right? Time to lock up. But remember, in the short run, you have fixed costs, things like rent or heavy equipment leases, and you absolutely have to pay those whether you produce 1,000 units or 0 units. So here is the crucial takeaway, and this is a bit of a mind blower for a lot of people. A short-run firm will actually eat some of those fixed losses and intelligently keep producing as long as it can still cover its variable costs. Think of variable costs as your day-to-day expenses. We're talking raw materials, hourly labor, the electricity running the machines. If the revenue coming in from selling your product can at least pay for the materials and labor to make that product, you should actually keep the factory running. It helps you chip away at those unavoidable fixed costs. Let's trace this out to find our absolute limit. Imagine tracing a new, much lower price line, let's call it P0, across until it hits point E0. At E0, the price has plummeted so low that it is just barely scraping the very bottom of the average variable cost, or AVC, curve. And again, the marginal cost curve sweeps right through this minimum point. At this exact spot, point E0, the firm is only just covering its day-to-day variable costs, literally nothing more. Which brings us to the ultimate survival rule for any short-run producer. A firm stays in the game as long as its price, or average revenue, is greater than or equal to its average variable cost. But if the price drops even a fraction of a cent below that line, if your price is suddenly less than your average variable cost, well, you've officially hit the edge of the cliff. At that point, you aren't even making enough money to buy the raw materials for the product. At that exact moment, you must stop production entirely to minimize the bleeding. This gives us a really solid, non-negotiable foundational rule. The shutdown point is mathematically triggered in the short run exactly when price equals average variable cost. If price falls to equal that average variable cost line, you've hit the literal stop production button. You just cannot operate sustainably below that metric, period. Let's put these two massive concepts head to head, just to make the contrast crystal clear. The break-even point is your no-profit, no-loss baseline. That happens when price equals average cost. You're covering absolutely everything, fixed and variable. The shutdown point, on the other hand, is your absolute maximum sustainable loss. That triggers when price equals average variable cost. You are taking a hit on all your fixed costs, but you're just barely making enough to justify keeping the lights on for one more day. This framework lays it all out perfectly for us. It maps the safe harbor of E1 right up against the cliff edge of E0. Up at break-even, your price, P1, perfectly equals average cost, giving us that comfortable no profit, no loss status. Down at the shutdown point, your price, P0, equals average variable cost at point E0. And if you dip even slightly below E0, your status switches instantly to stop production. Truly grasping this massive difference between average cost and average variable cost is basically the skeleton key to mastering short-run economics. Every single producer relies on this precise logic as step one of their decision-making process. Ask yourself the viability question first. Is price greater than or equal to average variable cost? If the answer is no, it's a straight line to shutting down. You have to ask this before you can even entertain the idea of finding perfect equilibrium or maximizing your profits. Viability always has to come before optimization. Which leaves us with a genuinely fascinating problem. Surviving the short-run shutdown point, just hovering at or barely above E0, is a victory, for sure. But it's a temporary one. You've kept the doors open, but you are still eating an economic loss every single day. So how does a business actually claw its way back from the brink of E0, navigate those brutal market forces, and safely return to the stability of E1? Or, better yet, pure profit? Well, that is the next great economic puzzle to solve.